Fate has a cruel way of giving us exactly what we need at the moment we least expect it. In the unforgiving heartland, where the earth remembers every promise and betrayal, fortunes are built on the bedrock of grit and destroyed by the slow poison of greed. A new legend is about to be clawed from the soil, a story of iron and will. Before the harvest begins, offer your tribute. If you believe in the triumph of the underdog against an unbreakable system, show your support with a like. Join our community by subscribing, for the deepest secrets are always buried just beneath the surface. Now, prepare yourselves. The scent of stale coffee and expensive leather filled the air in Marcus Gentry's office. It was a sterile, climate-controlled box of glass and polished oak, a hermetically sealed world that felt a universe away from the dust, diesel, and sweat that coated every surface of Leo Maxwell's life. For 3 brutal months, Leo had lived and breathed Gentry's fleet of gleaming, high-tech tractors. He'd worked from the first hint of dawn until the stars burned cold in the night sky, his knuckles split raw, his clothes a permanent testament to grease and hydraulic fluid. He was a mechanical ghost, haunting Gentry's immaculate workshop, coaxing life back into million-dollar machines that Gentry's own salaried mechanics, with their clean uniforms and diagnostics tablets, had declared dead. He'd performed miracles of resuscitation on combines and harvesters, not with fancy software, but with an intuitive feel for the soul of an engine, a gift passed down from his father. He'd done it all for a number, $15,000. To Gentry, it was a rounding error. To Leo, it was a mountain, a sheer cliff face he had to scale. It was the only thing standing between his mother, Sarah, and a surgery that the doctors, with unnerving calm, had labeled time-sensitive. He could feel the crushing weight of that number in the hollow pit of his stomach, a cold, dense stone of desperation. "So, we're all settled up," Mr. Gentry said, his voice as smooth and dismissive as the polished surface of his desk. He didn't bother to look up, his attention devoted to signing a stack of invoices with a gold-plated fountain pen that probably cost more than Leo's truck. Gentry was a man made of sharp angles and soft fabrics, a cashmere sweater in a world of denim and flannel, a predator who had forgotten he had claws because his money did all the killing for him. Leo cleared his throat, the sound rough and unwelcome in the cathedral-like silence of the office. "Yes, sir. The last of the combines is running like new, purring better than the day you bought it, I'd wager. I just need to get that final payment, and I'll be out of your hair." Gentry finally looked up, a flicker of something cold and amused in his eyes. It was the look of a man watching an insect struggle in a spider's web, a detached curiosity about how much a thing could squirm before it broke. He set his pen down with a delicate, deliberate click. "Payment." He let the word hang in the air, tasting it, savoring its power. "Leo, you've been a tremendous help, a real magician with those machines, but the books are tight this quarter. The futures market, unpredictable." He gestured vaguely, as if the abstract forces of global commerce were a personal inconvenience. A cold dread, slick and oily, began to seep into Leo's veins, a poison working its way to his heart. "We had an agreement, Mr. Gentry, a handshake and a signed work order. 15,000. I have the invoice right here." He held up the paper, but his hand trembled almost imperceptibly, a betrayal he couldn't control. Gentry chuckled. It wasn't a pleasant sound. It was the grating noise of metal on stone, the sound of a key turning in a lock. He stood, his expensive suit unwrinkled, and walked to the panoramic window that overlooked his vast, manicured fields, a green and gold kingdom built on debt and subsidies. He gestured to the perfect, geometric rows of corn. "An agreement," he mused, his back to Leo. "You know, Leo, I've been thinking a lot about your payment, about what's fair. And I've come up with a solution that I think is more than equitable." He turned, a cruel, knowing smirk twisting his lips. Sometimes the worst moments of our lives are just the universe preparing us for who we're meant to become. He walked to the door and held it open. "Come with me." He led Leo out of the air-conditioned sanctuary and into the blistering afternoon sun. The heat was a physical blow, a suffocating blanket after the chill of the office. Gentry walked him past the neat rows of new equipment, gleaming monuments to modern agriculture, their tires taller than Leo. He led him past the 50,000-gallon fuel tanks, shimmering in the heat haze, and then further to a far corner of the property. This was the boneyard, a place where multi-ton machines came to die, a graveyard of rusted metal and broken dreams, choked by poison ivy and forgotten by time. Gentry's kingdom, Leo realized, was built on a foundation of corpses. Gentry pointed a manicured finger at a hulking shape half swallowed by thorns and creeping vines, like a whale skeleton beached in a sea of weeds. It might have been a tractor once, decades ago. Now, it was a carcass of oxidized red metal, its tires long since rotted away to leprous flaps of rubber hanging from steel rims, its engine exposed to the elements like the gutted viscera of some great beast. It was the saddest, most defeated piece of machinery Leo had ever laid eyes on. "There," Gentry said, his voice dripping with a condescension so thick it was suffocating. "That's your payment. That's a 1972 Blackwood 7500, a real classic. It was worth 15 grand 40 years ago. Now," he paused for effect, "it's scrap." He looked Leo up and down, his gaze lingering on Leo's oil-stained work boots and torn jeans. "Scrap for a scrap picker. It seems fitting, don't you think?" He clapped Leo hard on the shoulder, a gesture devoid of any warmth, a gesture of ownership. "Take it. Consider us even. My accountant will write it off as an asset disposal. It's cleaner this way." Gentry smiled, a flash of perfectly white teeth. "Now get off my land." Leo stood there, the sun beating down on his neck, the buzz of horseflies a maddening chorus in the thick air. He looked at the rusted carcass, a tombstone of iron, then back at Gentry's smug, triumphant face. The injustice of it was a physical thing, a rock in his throat that he couldn't swallow, a pressure behind his eyes that threatened to crack his composure. He wanted to scream, to lash out, to take a wrench and systematically smash that perfect, smiling face. But his eyes flickered to the two burly foremen standing by the main gate, their arms crossed, watching him. They were Gentry's muscle, paid to handle problems like him. Violence wouldn't get him the money. It would only get him arrested and ensure his mother never got the care she needed. Defeated, humiliated, and utterly broken, Leo could only manage a slow, stiff nod. The surgery, his mother's pale face, the stack of bills on the kitchen table. It all swirled in his head, a vortex of despair that threatened to pull him under. He had walked onto Gentry Farms that morning with the fragile hope of a man on his last dollar. He was leaving with a pile of rust and the bitter, metallic taste of betrayal in his mouth. The journey home was a public spectacle of failure, a slow-motion parade of shame. Leo had to swallow his pride and borrow his neighbor's flatbed truck, an ancient Ford that groaned and sagged under the weight of the dead tractor. The process of extracting the rust bucket from its thorny grave was a 4-hour ordeal of sweat, swearing, and snapping winch cables. One cable, stretched to its limit, finally gave way with a sound like a rifle shot, whipping back and narrowly missing his head, leaving a stinging red welt on his cheek. It felt like the machine itself was fighting him, refusing to participate in its own humiliation. Every passing car on the county road slowed down, the drivers gawking at the pathetic scene. Leo, covered from head to toe in rust flakes, mud, and grease, wrestling with a ghost of a machine under the unforgiving sun. He could feel their gazes like insects crawling on his skin, Pity, curiosity, and a smug, satisfying judgment. He knew exactly what they were thinking. There goes Leo Maxwell, broke as ever, hauling another piece of junk to that cluttered yard of his. Some people never learn. The thought was so clear in his mind it was as if they'd shouted it from their car windows. His small property on the edge of town was a testament to his passion and his poverty. It was a triage center for broken things, an island of misfit machines. Lawnmowers with seized engines, generators that wouldn't start, cars that had been given their last rites by other, less patient mechanics. To the outside world, it looked like a junkyard, an eyesore that lowered property values. But to Leo, it was a sanctuary. He saw the soul in these discarded things, the potential for a second life that their former owners were too blind or too wealthy to see. He was a mechanical resurrectionist, but his miracles never seemed to translate into financial stability. As he finally backed the groaning trailer into his driveway, the old Ford's engine sputtering in protest, his mother, Sarah, emerged onto the porch. She moved slowly, a hand pressed to her side where the pain was a constant, unwelcome guest. Her face, usually a source of unwavering warmth for Leo, a beacon in his often troubled life, was etched with a new and terrifying kind of worry. "Leo, what on earth is that monstrosity?" she asked, her voice thin and frail, a sound that cut him deeper than any insult. "It's payment," Leo mumbled, his eyes fixed on the cracked pavement of the driveway. He couldn't bear to meet her gaze, couldn't stand to see the fragile hope he knew was there be extinguished. "Payment, from Mr. Gentry." The hope in her voice was a knife twisting in his gut. "Did you get it? The money for what we need?" She couldn't finish the sentence. They never said the word surgery out loud, as if speaking it would give the nameless dread more power, more substance. Leo finally forced himself to look at her, and the truth felt like ash and broken glass in his mouth. "He didn't pay, Mom. Not with money. He gave me this instead." He watched the light in her eyes flicker and die. It was a slow, agonizing dimming, like a candle flame being starved of air. She didn't cry. She didn't get angry. She just sagged a little, as if the immense weight of the world which she had borne with such grace for so long had suddenly doubled. It was worse than any outburst, worse than any accusation. That quiet, profound disappointment was a condemnation that echoed louder than any shout ever could. She simply nodded, a gesture of complete and utter defeat, and went back inside, the screen door sighing shut behind her with a sound of finality. In that silence, Leo heard the words she hadn't spoken: bankrupt, finished, over. The world had shrunk to the size of that pile of rust and the crushing reality of their situation. He was alone, shipwrecked on his own property. The next few days were a blur of suffocating shame and a stubborn, pointless pride. His neighbor, Old Man Hemlock, a retired farmer with hands like gnarled oak roots and a face like a topographical map of the county, leaned over the fence. "Heard what Gentry did to you, son," he said, his voice a low rumble, before spitting a stream of tobacco juice that sizzled on the dusty ground. "Man's a snake, always has been. His father was the same, just better at hiding it." He squinted at the rusted hulk. "But what in God's name are you gonna do with that thing? Ain't worth the gas it took to haul it here. It's a boat anchor. I'll give you 200 for the scrap metal. Best offer you'll get in this county." Leo's hands clenched into fists at his sides. $200, a final insult. "Not for sale, Mr. Hemlock," he said, his voice tight. "Suit yourself," the old man grunted, turning to walk away. "Pride don't pay doctor bills." The words were a parting shot, and they hit their mark. Everyone had an opinion. The mailman, who left the growing stack of white envelopes with red letters in the mailbox, gave him a pitying look. The kid who delivered the paper asked if he was building a monster truck. The clerk at the hardware store, where his credit was stretched thin, just shook his head sadly when Leo came in for penetrating oil and wire brush attachments. They all saw a pile of junk. They saw Leo's folly, another one of his hopeless projects that would never amount to anything, another monument to his failure to escape the gravity of his circumstances. But when Leo looked at the tractor, he saw something else. He forced himself to look past the shame, past the betrayal it represented. Beneath the caked-on grime and the peeling, oxidized paint, he saw lines of immense, undeniable strength. The chassis was overbuilt, forged from a quality of high-carbon steel he hadn't seen in modern, mass-produced equipment. The design was brutally simple, purely functional, a testament to an era when machines were built to last forever. There were no fragile plastic cowlings, no delicate sensor wires waiting to fail, no onboard computer to throw cryptic error codes. It was all iron and will. Gentry had treated it as disposable, leaving it to rot. Leo felt a strange, bitter kinship with the abandoned machine. He, too, had been treated as disposable, thrown on the scrap heap, and a dangerous, defiant thought began to form in his mind. What if the scrap heap was where the real treasures were hidden? And so, he began. His war against 40 years of neglect started not with a wrench, but with a pressure washer. For 2 solid days, from sunup to sundown, he blasted away the layers of time. Thick, brown rivers of mud, nests of hornets the size of his fist, blankets of green moss, and the petrified remains of countless small creatures. It all sloughed off, revealing the machine beneath. As the grime washed away, he saw a hint of the original color, and it wasn't the bright consumer red or green he'd expected. It was a deep, military-grade olive drab, a color meant for utility, not for show. It was strange. This wasn't a standard farm tractor color. It was the color of something built for war. Then came the rust. He worked with a wire wheel on an angle grinder, the screech of metal on metal, a constant, piercing shriek that filled the summer air and set the neighbors' dogs to barking. Sparks flew in a fiery, defiant testament to his determination, showering his arms and face. He sweated through 3 shirts a day, his muscles aching with a deep, satisfying burn, his eyes stinging from the metallic dust. He worked late into the night, under the stark, unforgiving glare of a single halogen work light, his small yard transformed into an open-air workshop, a stage for his solitary battle. He wasn't just cleaning a machine. He was performing an excavation, digging through the layers of time and abuse, searching for a sign, for a reason. He treated every frozen bolt with a strange reverence, soaking them in penetrating oil, patiently tapping them loose with a hammer and punch rather than shearing them off with the brute force of an impact wrench. Gentry saw a disposable object. Leo saw a history, a story waiting to be told. He was giving this forgotten machine the respect it had been denied for decades, and in doing so, he was slowly, painfully, reclaiming a piece of his own dignity. Each loosened bolt felt like a small victory against the man who had wronged him. Days bled into a week. He drained the ancient, sludgy fluids. The engine oil was the consistency of tar, the coolant a rusty, foul-smelling soup. He replaced them with clean, fresh lifeblood. He disassembled the entire fuel system, cleaning out the rust-clogged lines with compressed air, and rebuilding the massive, purely mechanical injector pump on his workbench, a delicate surgery on a vital organ. He meticulously rewired the simple electrical system, his calloused fingers tracing the paths of the original builders, replacing every cracked and brittle wire with new, heavy-gauge copper. The tires were a lost cause, rotted through to the steel rims. He spent $150 he didn't have on a set of used agricultural tires from a salvage yard, his heart pounding as he handed over his credit card, praying it wouldn't be declined. The transaction went through. A small reprieve. The engine was the heart of the beast, and he had saved it for last. It was an enormous inline-six diesel, bigger and heavier than any he'd ever seen in a tractor of this vintage. It was a monolith of cast iron, a monument to a forgotten philosophy of engineering, built to outlast the mountains themselves. He spent an entire day just cleaning the exterior of the block, scraping away the hardened, baked-on grease and dirt that entombed it. He felt like an archaeologist uncovering a rare fossil, chipping away the rock to reveal the skeleton of a leviathan. As his scraper worked its way along the side of the block, near the injector pump, it hit something hard and flat beneath the grime. A small metal plate, no bigger than a credit card, fastened with two small, flathead bolts. It was almost perfectly preserved by the cocoon of grease. Curious, he sprayed it with a degreaser and wiped it clean with a rag. Engraved on the plate were two lines of stark, simple military-style text. Blackwood Prototype Division. Serial No. 1. Leo stared at the plate, his scraper falling from his numb fingers and clattering on the concrete. His heart suddenly began hammering against his ribs, a frantic, wild drumbeat. 1. Prototype. It couldn't be. Blackwood was a legendary, long-defunct American manufacturer, known for building indestructible industrial equipment, bulldozers that carved mountains, generators that powered entire towns. But a prototype division, he'd never heard of it. His hands shaking, he scrambled inside, wiping the grease on his jeans as he sat down at his old, wheezing desktop computer. With trembling fingers, he typed Blackwood Prototype Division into the search bar. The first few results were dead ends, links to defunct company archives, digital ghosts. Then, buried deep within a forum for vintage engine enthusiasts, he found a post from 10 years ago. It was a thread about lost legends of American engineering, a discussion between old-timers and historians. The post told a story, a piece of industrial folklore that had been passed down in whispers. During the height of the Cold War in the early 1970s, the Department of Defense had secretly commissioned Blackwood to create a new kind of engine, not for a tank, but for a new generation of all-terrain military vehicles, prime movers designed to haul tactical nuclear missiles through any landscape, in any weather, after any kind of attack. The engine had to be unstoppable. The project was codenamed Project Monarch, and the engine itself was nicknamed the Iron King. It was designed with a single, obsessive purpose: absolute, unkillable reliability. No complex electronics, no delicate components that could be fried by an electromagnetic pulse. It was a purely mechanical beast, over-engineered to an absurd degree, with tolerances measured in microns and components forged from exotic alloys. It was designed to run on almost any combustible liquid: diesel, kerosene, jet fuel, even filtered crude oil. And it was designed to produce more raw, low-end torque than anything before or since. The legend said only 3 prototypes were ever built. 2 were reportedly destroyed during stress testing, failing under conditions that would have vaporized a normal engine. The third, serial number 1, the first and most perfect example, vanished after the project was abruptly scrapped. A new, cheaper, and more politically connected company had won the contract with a gas turbine engine. The Iron King, a masterpiece of mechanical engineering, was lost to history, presumed scrapped by the very company that created it. Leo felt the blood drain from his face, a cold rush that left him lightheaded. He looked back and forth between the grainy, black-and-white photo of the engine in the forum post, a picture taken in a secret development lab 40 years ago, and the massive block of iron sitting in his yard. They were identical. The uniquely shaped valve cover, the position of the oversized injector pump, the massively reinforced cast iron oil pan. It wasn't just a tractor. It was a housing, a shell built around a legend. It was the Iron King. Gentry, in his bottomless arrogance and ignorance, hadn't just given him scrap. He had given him a ghost, a myth made of iron, a priceless, one-of-a-kind military secret rusting in his weeds, a secret worth not thousands, but potentially millions. The realization hit Leo not as a wave of euphoria, but as a crushing, terrifying weight of responsibility. He possessed something unique, something priceless, a historical artifact of immense power. But what good was a priceless artifact when you were facing imminent financial ruin? The letters from the hospital and the bank were piling up on the kitchen table, their red, past-due stamps like little bleeding wounds. The fortune a collector might pay was a distant, abstract concept that would involve auctions, authentications, and lawyers, a process that could take months, even years. The surgery, however, was a very real and rapidly approaching deadline. He was a man dying of thirst while holding a cup made of solid gold. He couldn't sell a part of it. Its value was in its completeness, its history. The irony was so bitter it tasted like poison. It was during one of these late-night spirals of anxiety, sitting at the kitchen table under the flickering fluorescent light, mindlessly scrolling through the local news on his phone, that he saw it. A garish, flashing banner ad for the annual Tri-County Agricultural Fair, and highlighted in a bold, ridiculous font. The main event, the annual Tractor Pull Championship, the ultimate test of power and pride, grand prize, $20,000. $20,000. The number seemed to leap off the screen and burn itself into his retinas. It was 5,000 more than Gentry had cheated him out of. It was enough for the surgery, with enough left over to pay off the most urgent debts and keep the bank from their door for a few more months. It was a lifeline, a desperate, impossible, insane long shot of a lifeline. The next paragraph made his stomach clench into a tight, painful knot. Returning to defend his title is five-time champion Marcus Gentry of Gentry AgriCorp, with his state-of-the-art, custom-tuned case Steiger 620. A picture accompanied the text. Gentry, grinning from ear to ear, holding a massive, gaudy trophy next to a behemoth of a tractor, a gleaming red monster that cost more than Leo's entire property. It was a machine built by a corporation, a rolling supercomputer with over 600 horsepower, GPS-guided steering, 8 wheels, and a price tag of $500,000. Hope and despair wrestled within him, a brutal, exhausting conflict. To enter the pull would be to walk directly into the lion's den. He would be facing Gentry, the man who had humiliated him on his own turf in front of the entire county. He would be bringing a 40-year-old, forgotten military prototype, a ghost in a plain gray wrapper, to compete against the absolute pinnacle of modern agricultural technology. It was David versus a Goliath that had laser-guided artillery and a tactical support team. It was suicide. It was insane. He walked outside into the cool night air and stood before the tractor. He hadn't dared to start it yet. The restoration was complete, but the moment of truth had not yet arrived. He had no idea if the engine would even turn over after 40 years of silent slumber. He had done everything he could. The fuel was clean, the oil was fresh, the new battery was fully charged. But an engine that has sat dormant for 4 decades is a fickle thing. It can be a tomb of seized pistons and rusted valves, a heart of iron that has forgotten how to beat. He placed a hand on the cold, massive engine block. He could almost feel it, a dormant power coiled deep within the dense iron, a potential energy that was almost terrifying. This machine was built for one thing: to pull, to endure, to refuse to quit no matter the obstacle. In its silent, stoic presence, he felt a reflection of his own struggle. It was a kindred spirit forged in steel. "Well, old king," he whispered to the silent machine, the words swallowed by the chirping of the crickets. "I guess we're going to find out what you're really made of." The decision settled in his soul, not with a surge of confidence, but with the quiet, grim resolve of a man with no other options left. He had nothing left to lose but his pride, and Gentry had already tried to steal that. This wasn't just about the money anymore. It was about justice. It was about proving that true worth wasn't about price tags and polished chrome, but about what lies beneath the rust. The day of the Tri-County Fair arrived under a sky the color of a fresh bruise. The air was thick and heavy with humidity, promising a thunderstorm that hadn't yet decided to break. The fairgrounds were a chaotic symphony of Americana. The high-pitched screams of kids on the Ferris wheel, the distorted bark of carnies luring people to unwinnable games, the cloying, sweet smell of fried dough mingling with the earthy scent of livestock. But the heart of the fair, its thumping, diesel-powered core, was the grandstand. A set of weathered wooden bleachers packed with farmers, mechanics, and local families surrounded a long, straight track of deep, tilled earth. This was the arena. This was the tractor pull. Leo paid the $100 entry fee with the last of his emergency cash, his hand shaking so badly he could barely sign the liability waiver. The clerk, a portly woman with a bored expression that suggested she'd seen it all, looked at the description he'd written on the form for his vehicle. 1972 Blackwood Custom. She squinted at him over her glasses. "Never heard of a Blackwood. You sure that thing runs, honey?" "It runs," Leo said, his voice tighter and harsher than he intended. Getting the Iron King to the fair had been an ordeal in itself. The engine had finally coughed to life 2 nights before, not with a roar, but with a deep, earth-shaking rumble that rattled the windows of his house and brought Old Man Hemlock running to the fence with a look of disbelief on his face. The sound was primeval, a bass note that seemed to vibrate in his very bones. It was the sound of immense, barely contained power, a sleeping giant clearing its throat after a long sleep. He'd painted the entire tractor in a simple, tough-as-nails coat of industrial gray, the same color as a battleship. It wasn't pretty. It had no chrome, no decals, no shiny plastic. It was a monument to function over form, a machine stripped of all vanity. As he rumbled towards the staging area, a path cleared before him. People stopped mid-conversation, pointing and staring. Tractors in the pull were usually a vibrant, corporate-sponsored spectacle of reds, greens, and blues. His machine was a gray specter, an anachronism from a forgotten era, a ghost haunting the festival. Then the whispers turned to snickers, and the snickers turned to outright derisive laughter. "What in the world is that relic?" someone shouted from the beer tent, and a wave of laughter followed. "Did he pull that out of a river?" another voice jeered. The laughter was a physical force, a wave of ridicule that washed over him, hot and suffocating. He kept his eyes fixed forward, his knuckles white on the simple steel steering wheel. He felt like a gladiator walking into the Colosseum, armed with a wooden spoon. The other competitors sat high in the air-conditioned, tinted glass cabs of their modern machines, looking down at him with a mixture of pity and contempt. He was an outsider, a joke, and they were all in on it. And then he saw him. Marcus Gentry, standing by his gleaming red Steiger, surrounded by a sycophantic crowd of admirers. He was holding court, a king in his castle, basking in the glow of his own importance. Gentry saw Leo approach, and his face broke into a wide, malicious grin. He strode over, his expensive leather boots sinking slightly into the soft dirt, every step a display of casual ownership of the ground beneath his feet. "Well, well, well," Gentry boomed, his voice loud enough for everyone in the staging area to hear. "Look what the cat dragged in, or rather, what the scrap picker dragged home from the dump." The crowd around him roared with laughter, a chorus of approval for their champion. Gentry leaned in close to the cab of the Iron King, his voice dropping to a venomous, conspiratorial whisper. "I cannot believe you have the audacity to show your face here, let alone with my trash." He patted the gray fender of the Iron King, a gesture of profound ownership and contempt. "You're driving my trash, Leo. Does it feel as worthless as you are?" Leo's entire body went rigid. Every instinct, every frayed nerve screamed at him to react, to throw a punch, to say something that would wipe that smug, hateful smirk off Gentry's face. But he didn't. He forced himself to look past Gentry at the muddy track, at the $20,000 prize sign hanging over the finish line. He thought of his mother, of the stack of bills, of the quiet desperation that had become his constant companion. He took a slow, deliberate breath, the smell of diesel, rain, and Gentry's expensive cologne filling his lungs. "We'll see whose trash it is," Leo said, his voice quiet but as steady and solid as the iron beneath him. Gentry laughed again, a full-throated, arrogant bellow that seemed to shake the very air. "Oh, we will. We certainly will." He turned back to his audience. "Get a good look, folks. This is what desperation looks like. He's going to try and win the championship with my garbage." The humiliation was complete. It was public. It was absolute. Leo sat in the gray cab of his gray tractor, the laughter of the entire county raining down on him like acid. He was no longer just a mechanic. He was a spectacle, a court jester in the kingdom of Marcus Gentry. And in that moment, sitting in the belly of the beast Gentry had so casually discarded, a cold, hard resolve solidified within him, turning his despair into something sharp and dangerous. Gentry had made this personal. Now, the Iron King wouldn't just be pulling a weighted sled. It would be pulling for vengeance. The competition began just as the bruised sky finally opened up. A light drizzle quickly turned into a steady, relentless downpour, turning the carefully prepared dirt track into a slick, treacherous morass of deep, clinging mud. The conditions were a nightmare for the modern tractors. Their power was useless without traction. The first few competitors, with their high horsepower but relatively lightweight frames and computerized systems, spun their tires helplessly. They dug themselves into deep, muddy ruts before their onboard computers, sensing the wheels slip and engine strain, cut the power to prevent expensive damage. They were powerful, but they were fragile, their performance dictated by 1,000 sensors that weren't programmed for this kind of brutal, primitive struggle against the Earth itself. Then it was Gentry's turn. His massive Steiger 620, all 25 tons of it, roared onto the track, its engine a high-tech scream. The crowd cheered, confident that their 5-time champion would master the conditions. The big machine hooked up to the weighted sled, a monstrous implement designed to get progressively heavier as it was pulled down the track, its steel pan digging deeper into the ground. The Steiger's engine screamed at its red line, its 8 massive tires churning, sending rooster tails of mud flying 20 feet into the air. It was a spectacular display of brute force, and it was impressive. The sled moved, clawing its way down the track. But Leo, watching with a mechanic's cold, analytical eye, saw the problem. The machine was too smart for its own good. Its sophisticated traction control system, designed for optimal efficiency in a field, was fighting itself in the deep mud, constantly adjusting, cutting, and reapplying power to different wheels, searching for a grip that wasn't there. The sheer weight of the tractor, an advantage on dry ground, was now a liability, causing it to sink deeper into the mire with every rotation of its tires. About 3/4 of the way down the 300-foot track, with a final, shuddering groan, The wheels spun uselessly, digging 4 deep graves. The engine whined, and a small, insistent warning light blinked on the massive dashboard inside the cab. Gentry had failed to make a full pull. He slammed his fist against the steering wheel, his face a mask of pure fury. Still, he had set the mark to beat. It was by far the best run of the day. Finally, it was Leo's turn. The announcer's voice boomed over the PA system, dripping with sarcasm. And now, from the far corner of somewhere, Leo Maxwell in his Blackwood Custom. As he rumbled the Iron King onto the track, the laughter that had greeted him earlier had been replaced by a skeptical, pitying silence. The rain plastered his hair to his forehead as he leaned out to hook the massive, mud-caked chain from the sled to the tractor's simple, brutally thick drawbar. The machine looked ancient and out of place, a relic from a forgotten world against the backdrop of the modern fair. Gentry stood by the side of the track, arms crossed, the arrogant smirk back on his face, waiting for the inevitable, humiliating failure that would validate his worldview. Leo settled back into the simple, unforgiving metal seat. There was no computer here. No traction control, no sensors, no air conditioning, no GPS. Just a few analog gauges with faded numbers, a throttle lever, and the direct, unbreakable mechanical connection between his hand, the engine, and the ground. He took a deep breath, his world shrinking to the machine and the muddy track ahead. He pushed the throttle forward. The sound that erupted from the Iron King's simple, wide-mouthed exhaust stack was unlike anything the crowd had ever heard. It wasn't the high-pitched, turbine-like scream of a modern, turbocharged engine. It was a deep, guttural, ground-shaking roar. It was the sound of pure, unadulterated torque, a primal bellow of defiance that seemed to come from the very core of the earth. He let out the heavy clutch. The 4 huge tires, bald but immensely wide, bit into the mud. They didn't spin. They grabbed. The front end of the tractor lifted a few inches off the ground as the engine settled into its work, the RPMs barely dropping. The sled, the same sled that had fought Gentry's $500,000 machine to a standstill, began to move. It didn't lurch. It didn't struggle. It glided. The crowd went utterly silent. Jaws hung open. Gentry's smirk vanished, replaced by a look of stunned, slack-jawed disbelief. The Iron King wasn't fighting the mud. It was dominating it. The engine's low, steady rhythm, asterisk thump 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 asterisk, was the heartbeat of some unstoppable creature woken from a long slumber. It was a display of raw, mechanical power that was almost terrifying in its brutal efficiency. Leo wasn't just driving a tractor. He was conducting an orchestra of iron and fire. He could feel the immense, relentless power flowing through the machine, a direct connection from the engine's core to the earth itself. The sled moved past Gentry's mark. Then it kept going, effortlessly. It seemed to gain speed as the weight on the sled increased, as if the challenge was only now waking it from its long slumber. The beast was awake. With a final, triumphant surge of power that sent a tremor through the bleachers, the Iron King pulled the sled clear across the finish line. A full pull, the only full pull of the day. For a long moment there was absolute silence, broken only by the rhythmic, thumping idle of the tractor and the drumming of the rain on the tin roof of the grandstand. Then the crowd erupted. It wasn't just cheering. It was a roar of genuine awe and disbelief. They had witnessed the impossible. They had seen a ghost from the past humiliate the future. Leo sat there, rain dripping from his chin, his heart pounding with a violent mixture of adrenaline and vindication. He had done it. Through the cheering crowd, he saw a figure running towards him, slipping and sliding frantically in the mud. It was Gentry. His expensive cashmere sweater was soaked and mud-stained, his face contorted in a mask of manic desperation. The cool, arrogant mask of the landlord was gone, ripped away to reveal the raw panic of a gambler who had just realized he'd thrown away a winning lottery ticket. He scrambled up onto the tractor's running board, his face inches from Leo's. The smell of rain, mud, and desperation rolled off him. "What is that thing?" he hissed, his eyes wild and unfocused, darting over the massive gray engine block. "That's not a Blackwood 7500. "What is it?" Leo just looked at him, his expression calm, unreadable, and utterly impenetrable. Gentry's voice rose to a frantic, cracking shout. "I'll trade you, my Steiger, right now, title for title, plus the 15,000 I owe you. I'll give you 20,000, cash." He was grabbing at Leo's arm, his composure completely shattered. He finally understood. He didn't know the specifics, didn't know the name Iron King. But he knew, with a certainty that was hollowing him out from the inside, that he had made a catastrophic, history-altering mistake. He had thrown away a diamond, thinking it was a piece of glass. Leo looked from Gentry's frantic, pleading face to the magnificent machine thrumming beneath him. He felt its steady, powerful heartbeat through the soles of his boots. This machine was more than just metal. It was a symbol of his own resilience, of his father's legacy. He had poured his sweat, his hope, and the last of his money into it. He had treated it with respect when it was just a pile of rust, seeing the potential that Gentry, in his blindness, could never perceive. It had rewarded him. It had saved him. He gently but firmly removed Gentry's hand from his arm. He looked the man square in the eye, the man who had laughed at him, who had tried to crush him under the heel of his boot. And for the first time, Leo felt no anger, no hatred, only a cold, clear sense of finality. "You already paid me, Mr. Gentry," Leo said, his voice level and clear over the idling engine. "You paid me with scrap. I kept the scrap." He turned his gaze forward, looking out at the cheering crowd and the muddy track he had just conquered. "It's not for sale." The finality in his voice was absolute, a door slamming shut, a verdict delivered. Gentry stared at him, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. Defeated, he slid off the tractor and stumbled back into the mud, a pathetic, rain-soaked figure. The power dynamic had not just shifted. It had been completely and irrevocably inverted. Gentry was no longer the king on the hill. He was just a man who had been outsmarted, outworked, and undone by the scrap picker he despised. The news of the mysterious gray tractor and its impossible victory spread through the farming community like wildfire. Before Leo had even collected his $20,000 prize money, a man in a crisp suit and perfectly polished shoes approached him, his eyes alight with a fervor that went beyond mere curiosity. He wasn't a farmer. He was a curator from the American Museum of Industrial Heritage in Pennsylvania, a freelance journalist at the event, an amateur historian, had recognized the engine's unique configuration from old, declassified engineering archives and had made a frantic call. "That engine," the curator said, his voice trembling with an almost religious excitement as he ran a reverent hand over the valve cover, careful not to smudge it. "It's the Finch prototype, isn't it? The Iron King. We thought it was destroyed. It's the holy grail of mid-century mechanical engineering, a true national treasure." He made Leo an offer on the spot, an offer that made the $20,000 prize money seem like pocket change. $1.5 million, as is. The museum would arrange for its transport. It was a life-altering, dreamlike sum, enough to solve every problem Leo had ever had and 100 more he hadn't even thought of yet. For a dizzying moment, Leo was tempted. He could pay for his mother's surgery 10 times over, buy her a new house, buy himself a new truck, and never worry about a bill again for the rest of his life. But then he looked at the Iron King, its engine still ticking as it cooled in the rain. He thought about it being sold, about it sitting static and silent under soft lights in a climate-controlled museum, a relic behind a velvet rope for people to stare at. This machine wasn't built to be admired. It was built to work. It was built to endure. Selling it would be a betrayal of its very soul, a betrayal of the spirit of his father, who believed machines were meant for purpose, not for display. "Thank you for the offer," Leo said, the words feeling right and solid as soon as they left his mouth. "It's an honor, but it's not for sale. It has work to do." The curator was disappointed but, to his credit, seemed to understand. Leo took the $20,000 and scheduled his mother's surgery for the following week. With the remaining money, he didn't buy a new truck or fix up his house. He bought a business license, liability insurance, and a set of magnetic signs for the doors of his old Ford. The signs were simple, painted in the same battleship gray as the tractor. They read, "Iron King Contracting, no job too tough." His first client was a farmer whose land bordered Gentry's. His fields were notoriously tough, full of compacted clay and rock that had broken two of his plows and stalled his brand-new John Deere. Leo showed up with the Iron King and a massive 7-shank deep ripper plow he'd bought at an auction. The Iron King pulled it through the compacted earth as if it were sand, never straining, never faltering, the engine maintaining its steady, rhythmic heartbeat. The farmer was so impressed he told 2 of his neighbors before Leo had even finished the job. Within 3 months, Leo was the most in-demand contractor in 3 counties. His reputation was built on the back of the legendary machine. The Iron King never broke down. It used a fraction of the fuel of the modern tractors. It could work in rain and mud that left Gentry's entire fleet of computerized machines stuck, waiting for a specialized technician to drive out from the city. Farmers, men who valued reliability and function over bells and whistles, loved it. They were tired of paying for expensive software updates and delicate sensor repairs on overly complex equipment. They wanted strength. They wanted reliability. Leo and his Iron King were the answer. He began systematically stealing Gentry's clients, not through malice or predatory pricing, but through sheer, undeniable competence. He could underbid Gentry on every contract because his overhead, no lease payments, minimal fuel costs, no repair technician bills, was a fraction of Gentry's. One by one, the pillars of Gentry's agricultural empire began to crumble. The men who had once admired Gentry and laughed at Leo now saw Gentry for what he was, a man who owned expensive things but understood the value of nothing. He was left with a fleet of $500,000 Plastican circuit board behemoths, their crippling lease payments a monthly hemorrhage of cash, while the man he'd scorned was building a new legacy with a piece of his trash. The ultimate lesson was being written in the dirt of the heartland. True value isn't in what you own, but in what you can build. It is found not by those who write the checks, but by those who are willing to do the work. A year passed. The seasons turned. The fields were harvested, lay fallow, and were planted once more. Iron King Contracting was no longer a one-man, one-tractor operation. Leo had hired 2 employees, good men he trusted, and had carefully acquired and restored 3 other pieces of vintage, overbuilt Blackwood equipment he'd tracked down across the country, a testament to his growing legend. He was successful, respected, and most importantly, his mother was healthy, her laughter once again filling their small, now renovated house. One crisp autumn afternoon, Leo had a meeting at the Tri-County Farmers Bank. He wasn't there to ask for a loan. He was there to open a substantial new business investment account. As he walked through the heavy glass doors, clean and confident in a new work shirt and jeans, he saw a familiar figure sitting in the waiting area, looking small and defeated in one of the oversized pleather chairs. It was Marcus Gentry. His cashmere sweater was gone, replaced by a rumpled, ill-fitting dress shirt. His face was sallow and pale, the arrogant smirk replaced by the tight, worried lines of a man on the brink of absolute ruin. He was clutching a thick file of papers, loan modification requests and delinquency notices, Leo guessed. He looked up as Leo entered, and a flicker of the old, impotent hatred sparked in his eyes, but it was quickly extinguished by a wave of weary, soul-deep resignation. The bank manager, a man who had once treated Leo with polite, dismissive condescension, rushed out from behind his desk, his face beaming with a practiced, servile smile. "Leo, good to see you. Come right on back. We have all the paperwork ready for you." The manager walked right past Gentry without a second glance, as if he were part of the furniture. Gentry was just another failing account, another problem to be dealt with later. Leo was the future. He was the man with the Midas touch, the local legend who had built an empire out of scrap iron. Leo paused for a moment and looked at the man who had tried to destroy him. He could have gloated. He could have said, "Remember me." He could have reminded him of the rusted tractor, the laughter, the humiliation. The words were there on the tip of his tongue, but he didn't say them. The victory was already so complete, so absolute, that any words would have cheapened it, would have reduced it to a petty squabble. He simply gave Gentry a quiet, neutral nod, a simple, final acknowledgement of a man he once knew. Then he turned and followed the manager into his office, leaving Marcus Gentry alone with the ghosts of his expensive, useless machines and the crushing weight of his own arrogance. Leo didn't need to say a word. His success, silent and undeniable, was the only response that ever mattered. And so, their destiny was forged, a new legacy built from the ashes of the old. Their story now belongs to time, but its power only grows if shared. The greatest value is often hidden beneath the surface, visible only to those with the patience to look and the grit to do the work. But as one man breaks the system, another is trapped by it. What happens when the only way to save your family is to become the monster you swore you'd never be? If this journey marked your soul, leave a like and subscribe. For the best stories are those that refuse to die in silence.